I'm very curious about their roles that is deeply connected to the modern politics and the society. And first of all, I'll ask on Elon Musk. What was the trigger that you followed him, being embedded in his daily life?
Thank you so much for asking and for having me on. You know, he was a person who was bringing us into the era of electric vehicles. He was bringing us into the era of sustainable energy and solar roofs. He was also somebody who had the only rockets that could lift things into orbit and then land upright and be reused again. So he had created this whole satellite system, recreating the internet in low Earth orbit. He was the only company that could get astronauts from the US to the space station or into orbit. I thought this is going to be a great, fun technology book. And so I talked to him and he said, yeah, I'll do the book. I'll let you do the book. And I said, I want to be by your side for 2 years. I want to be in every meeting. I want nothing to be off limits. And he surprised me. He said, yeah, okay. And then I said, and here's the other part. I don't want you to have any control over the book. I'm not even going to send it to you in advance. And I thought he'd say, you got to be kidding. But he said, okay. And so I think I was able to do a very honest storytelling about how this guy has done such amazing things, but also the dark side of his personality that makes him so controversial.
Was the 2 years hard time for you?
You know, it wasn't exactly easy going. It wasn't like sitting on a beach and drinking a nice beer. It was intense. It was all in because Elon Musk, you know, somebody once asked me, does he enjoy what he's doing? I said, no, he doesn't enjoy it, but he also doesn't enjoy enjoyment. He doesn't look for enjoyment. He's not somebody who wants to rest. And so every time things are going well for him, like the rockets are working and the cars are working, he pushes himself into another drama. His brother Kimball told me he's a drama magnet from childhood, that the sort of harsh childhood he went through gave him a love for risk-taking and adventure and even for drama and trauma. And so riding alongside with him wasn't like sort of being on a pleasure cruise with your feet up on the deck.
I think it's a silly thing to compare with the other geniuses like Steve Jobs or Einstein's. But I want to ask you, what is the uniqueness of Elon Musk among a lot of geniuses you wrote, such as Steve Jobs or Einstein?
Well, thanks for asking that, because everybody says, is he just like Steve Jobs? And I say, no, all people are different. And I know in Japan, people admire Steve Jobs.
Yes.
Well, you'll admire and be fascinated by Elon Musk, but for different reasons. It's not all the same. Musk, and this is something in Japan that you know very well, Musk not only cares about the product, he cares about the engineering of the product. He cares about the factory. Here in the United States, we lost the ability to manufacture things. But Musk believes that unless you have your designers and yourself and your engineers right next to the assembly line, you're not doing that. Unless you're doing it all yourself, you're not going to innovate very well. So that's one thing about Musk that makes him different. Also, he's got multiple personalities. There's a funny Elon Musk, and there's an inspirational Elon Musk, and there's this hardcore driven technologist and engineer, Elon Musk. But also there's sort of a dark side, what his girlfriend, Claire Boucher, the artist known as Grimes, calls demon mode. And so I think you're going to see a person who is more complex and more interesting than almost anybody I've ever heard of.
How do you define the word genius?
I think that genius is not supposed to be the same thing as smart. I'm sure you've met, and so have I, a whole lot of smart people. You've probably interviewed a lot of them, but not all of them amount to very much. because in order to be a genius, you have to think out of the box. You have to be imaginative. You have to be creative. In Steve Jobs' words, you have to think different. So what makes Einstein a genius is not that he's a better mathematician or has more processing power than, Niels Bohr or Max Planck or other physicists of the time. It's because he can think different. He can question, is time always constant, or is time relative? These are out of the box things. Likewise with Musk, when people say you can't do a rocket that way, he goes back to the first principles of physics and he thinks different. So all of the geniuses I've written about, Jennifer Doudna, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Einstein, what they do is they have imagination and creativity. And it comes from my other original genius, Leonardo da Vinci, who may not have been the smartest guy in the beginning of the Renaissance, but he was the most creative and imaginative.
In the context of computer technology, you describe Steve Jobs as someone who stands at the intersection of arts and science, or humane study and technology. And how do you describe Elon Musk? What kind of intersection does he stand at?
Whether it's Leonardo da Vinci, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, they want to know almost everything you could know about every subject that's knowable. And that helps them see patterns across nature. All of them are interested in history, for example. They're all interested in beauty. And Musk is interested in everything from rocket ships to cars to social media to how our brains work. And maybe can we plant a chip in the brain so we can communicate with our computers? And so I think having, nowadays, whether it be students in the United States or in Japan, we sometimes want to get them to focus and be a specialist. But I think a lot of the geniuses I've written about, especially Elon Musk, are interested in a wide variety of things.
Musk led SpaceX and Tesla to success by his tremendous passion, but he appears to be struggling to manage Twitter. And you wrote in your book that Twitter was the ideal playground for him. What kind of, but was it a good move for him?
No, actually not. And I probably got to say, when I say ideal playground, it meant he thought it. He loved the playground. He loved tweeting. But I don't think he has the instincts for understanding emotional and social interactions, as well as that he has for understanding engineering and physics reactions. And so when he bought Twitter, he said to me, he said, it's really an engineering problem. It's a question of the technology. And I'm thinking, no, Twitter is not a technology product. It's an advertising medium that depends on social emotions, creating a pleasant place for advertisers to, make their advertising. And he's not as good at feel for what advertisers would like. Now he's going to turn it into something like WeChat or one of the other apps, especially in Asia, that do everything, that allow you to make transactions, that allow you to do finances, that allow you to buy content. And I think he has a good feel for that. And he's really good at getting video up on Twitter now, or X as he calls it, and making people pay for it. So that's an advance that he's done with what he now calls X. But I think he's also lost a lot of advertising because he doesn't fully appreciate that advertisers don't want to be in a controversial environment.
What is your thought about Musk's posts to Twitter and X, I think they are mirroring like a mirror of his unpredictable temperament.
You're absolutely right. He's so unpredictable that even one of his friends, when they were traveling, said, I don't like it when you're tweeting late at night. You do unpredictable, sometimes really mean things, and takes Elon's phone and puts it in a hotel safe and punches in a code so Elon can't get it. And at 3 a.m, Elon calls hotel security to open up the safe so he can get the phone. And he doesn't control his impulses. He's very juvenile in a way, and he'll just fire things off. And sometimes he does it when he's in a dark mind space. And he'll call somebody a pedophile, or he'll say something about the husband of the Speaker of the House here in the United States. All of these tweets, or he'll do tweets that people think are attacking, that are supporting anti-Semitic people who happen to be on Twitter, and that he's amplifying some of the voices of people who are saying biased things. And yeah, if I had my way, maybe I'd put an impulse control button on his thumbs so that we'd control his impulses and he wouldn't sometimes tweet out those bad things. But at the end of the book, I say, I wonder, though, if there was an impulse control button that stopped Musk from doing some of these impulsive things, it would make him better on Twitter, but would he be the type of person who got rockets into orbit? Maybe a Musk unbound, a Musk not fettered, is the price we have to pay for a guy who's taking us to Mars and to the era of electric vehicles. I don't think it excuses his behavior, by the way. Let me add that. In other words, if he tweets something that's very harmful, calling somebody a pedophile, say, or questioning what happened to Speaker Pelosi's husband, I don't think that's excused, but I do try to have you understand it, understand what's going through that mind, because it's all one personality. I mean, it's all one person with many personalities.
On the other hand, Musk wanted to make Twitter a place for free speech, as he says. However, freedom of speech entails certain restrictions. He seems to be struggling with his contradiction. What is your take on this?
I think you're absolutely right. I think that when he first decided he might want to take control of Twitter, it was April of last year. I was there. He was in Austin at the factory. And he's talking to me and to a few other people around him about it's important to have more free speech. And there's some truth to that. Our social media, including Twitter and Facebook, had shut down discussions of some political issues, had shut down discussion of whether COVID lockdowns might be doing more harm than good, or mask mandates might not be working, or whether it was a lab leak from China or not, this virus. And so maybe there was too much constriction of free speech. But when he said he wanted to open it up, let Donald Trump back on Twitter, yeah, I understand that. President of the United States, he was. Maybe you shouldn't restrict his speech on Twitter. But his friends, even his friends who were libertarian and believed in free speech, said, it's not that simple. Maybe we're amplifying hate speech as well. So I think you see him working out. We want to open it to more free speech, but we don't want to amplify or give more reach to hate speech. It's a delicate balance. And one thing I don't think Elon Musk is good at is delicate balances. He's kind of all in and hardcore. So he's having a little trouble figuring out how do you reach that balance on Twitter.
Yeah, I'll ask you on the importance of data. It is often said data is a new oil of 21st century, and Musk collects a vast amount of data from Tesla, from Twitter, X, a vast amount of driving data, vast amount of communication data. So, and I have to say, I'm a bit concerned to see such huge amount of data being consolidated into a single individual. What is your view of Musk's place in our world?
This is one of the big questions of our time, which is how much data can big companies, whether it be Google or Tesla or Musk or Facebook or anybody, get? And because of that data, we've been able to develop artificial intelligence that's trained on all of our postings, all of our writings. Maybe someday all of our tweets will be, as you said, part of the data that Elon Musk owns that will train artificial intelligence. Likewise, he has done something really different in the past few months, which is turn the self-driving system in Tesla into something that's artificial intelligence empowered. Meaning instead of having rules that say, if you see a red light, stop, or if you see a double yellow line, don't cross it. Instead, it takes all of the data you talked about, 8 billion frames a week, let's say, of data from Tesla cars and consolidates that, as you said, into Tesla. Well, the upside is it'll teach our cars how to drive. It'll create artificial intelligence models that we can chatbot with. What's the downside? Well, maybe we should be able to protect our own data. I think we should probably be given the choice. I actually am fine with some of my data being used. I go on Amazon. They know what I buy. It's useful. They pop things up. They give me offers. I go on Google. They know what I search. They pop things up that make it relevant for me, including ads. I don't mind that. But I like the ability to say, turn off cookies, turn off search, turn off my data. And I think we're going to need regulation that will allow that to happen.
And, Elon Musk himself has voiced about the risks of AI technology since it was still a concept. But now the same man is trying to create maximum truth-seeking AI by launching XAI. Do you think he could overcome this contradiction?
Well, I think that he went to the U.S. Congress this week and talked to the Democrats, in particular, Chuck Schumer, about how we need a regulatory agency to keep artificial intelligence safe. And I think he's probably right. You can't say, let's leave it to Elon Musk to do it or to Larry Page and Google to do it. I think whether it be Japan or Europe or the US, we're going to need a consensus on who regulates it, just like we regulate gene editing, for example. I think ever since he was a child and read Isaac Asimov's robot stories, he's been worried that we could create an artificial intelligence that's harmful to humanity rather than beneficial to humanity. And that's why he got involved with DeepMind, one of the great AI companies, and why he was upset when DeepMind got bought by Google, because he thought Larry Page and Google didn't care enough about AI safety. So that's going to be the next big thing for him. And you're right, there are contradictions. He wants his own AI company. He wants it regulated, and he's fearful. But he's going to keep going ahead even if they don't regulate it.
Okay, and Elon Musk had no choice but to become involved in the war in Ukraine. And the book also described that sensitive communications between Musk and the Ukrainian and the U.S. governments over the provision of Starlink.
Correct.
Could you tell us more about the...
Well, I think it begins when Russia does its horrible invasion of Ukraine. And every other satellite communication system is knocked out by the Russians. Viasat, the commercial one, is knocked out. The military ones are knocked out. The only communication system that the Russians can't knock out is Starlink, the one that Elon Musk has put up. And he has a hero complex. And that very first day of the invasion, he's being asked by the Ukrainians, we're going to get crushed because we can't communicate with our troops. The Russians are going to win. You got to help us. And he sends 100, then 200, then 1,000 Starlink dishes for free. He donates them to the Ukrainians and really saves the Ukrainian war effort that first week because they're then able to communicate with their troops. Huge help to the Ukrainians. And all the text messages, both from President Zelensky to Vice Minister Fedorov, are all in the book, thanking him and asking him for more. And he puts his team on it. They give him more and more. But then last September, they're using Starlink, the Ukrainians are, to launch a sneak attack using drone submarines connected to Starlink to sink the Russian fleet in Crimea. And Musk, I talked to him, he's upset. He thinks this will start World War III. He thinks this is like Pearl Harbor, a sneak attack. And he tells me, I'm not going to allow them to use it. We're not allowing them to use Starlink to do that, to go on the offense. And I thought he had made that decision that night. I later had to correct it because he had made the decision, earlier. But that night he makes a decision not to enable Starlink. And it means the submarines wash up. And whether or not he made it that night or reaffirmed it that night, an earlier decision, it meant that he had the power that night to make it so that that sneak attack failed, as it did, or succeeded. And that's too much power, in my mind, for one person to have. And later on, you see the text messages in the book. He's doing it not just for Crimea, but in real time, having discussions with the Ukrainians about whether or not Starlink should enable them to do attacks in the Donbass, in the eastern Ukraine. Finally, I asked Musk, have you talked to General Mark Milley, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs? And he talks to the U.S. government officials, and he decides, maybe this is too much power for me. Even Elon Musk believes this may be too much power. He says to me, how did I get into this war? I made Starlink so we could watch movies and chill and play video games, and now it's being used for a war. So he ends up making a contract with the U.S. government to supply and sell Starlink, a certain number of them, and Starlink services to the U.S. military and intelligence agencies. So U.S. officials, and I assume Ukrainian officials, get to decide how Starlink can be used, and is no longer something where Elon Musk is sitting there one night, as he was when he was talking to me, saying, do I enable it? Do I keep it disenabled? What do I do?
You were there at the moment, the decision-making of Elon Musk on the Ukraine war.
I was communicating with him, talking to him. Sometimes we're talking about months where he's first deciding to send Starlink, then that night where he decides to keep it disabled for Crimea, and then right after that when they're fighting over whether it should be in the Donbass. So sometimes we're talking about phones, sometimes I'm standing with him at the Austin Gigafactory, but we're talking about April through really the end of last year, where he was deeply involved in making decisions on how Starlink would be used to help Ukraine in its war against Russia and to stop the Russian invasion.
As a journalist and as a historian, how did you feel the reality of the war at the time?
Well, my opinions about the war aren't that important, but I felt Russia should not have invaded Ukraine. My opinions also were that, thank goodness, one person has created a communication system, Starlink, Elon Musk, that enables Ukraine to survive and to survive the attack. And he was doing it not just for the Ukrainian military, but for its hospitals, for its news services, for its schools and education. So I was very surprised that no other company and no other country was able to create a communication system that the Russians couldn't shut down. But I was pleased that at least Starlink, the Elon Musk system, had survived. But my own personal views about Ukraine were I'm glad that Ukraine was able to fend off or at least stop at a certain point the bad Russian invasion.
I think technology has become so powerful that it is inseparable from politics and international relations. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that when we look at technology, it's always a question of do our moral processing power, our ability to handle it morally, does it keep up with our new technology? You maybe want to go back to gunpowder to figure out whether that's the case. You certainly are going to look at the weaving looms in England and did it put people out of work? Nowadays, I think we would look at social media, look at places like Twitter or WeChat or TikTok or Facebook, and say, is that helping democracy? Is that helping our society? Or is it hurting our society? Is it undermining and making us more polarized, our democracy? And the answer is some of each. Likewise, you can look at gene editing technology. I wrote about that in the Codebreaker. It's important technology called CRISPR that the heroine of my book, The Codebreaker, Jennifer Doudna, created. Do we really want to edit the genes of our children? So I write books about technology because I think, and this is something in Japan that's particularly true, that wrestling with the moral implications of our technology, be it our social media, be it our life sciences and gene editing tools, be it our Starlink satellites, be it the internet, I think we have to do it. And in order to do it, to regulate it or to think it through or understand it morally, you have to understand the technology and you have to understand the people who made the technology. And sometimes I worry about people saying, well, we have to stop gene editing or stop Twitter or stop social media. I say, yeah, but first you got to understand it. And so I write books so people can understand the people who made this technology, and then we can decide how we should deploy it.
Should politics approach to innovators like Elon Musk? How should politics approach to him?
Well, I think that in the United States and to some extent in Japan, we've had too much politics that regulates certain things and acts as a referee and guardrails, so that sometimes we're a little bit too cautious and not risk-taking. It was more than 50 years ago, we were able to send humans to the moon. But in the time since then, we haven't gotten back to the moon. We've even had trouble until Musk came along getting astronauts into orbit from the United States. And I think that's because we've become a little bit too risk averse. And so that's where politics has created a lot of regulators and rule makers as opposed to a lot of risk takers. That said, we just talked about the need for certain technologies to get regulated. That includes AI, and includes self-driving cars, for example. So I think we have to get right this balance between what should our politicians do in terms of regulating technology and what should they do in allowing innovation and some risk-taking to push our technology forward.
Okay. Going back to personality of Elon Musk, I remember you mentioned his mission assigned to him I remember you mentioned the 3 missions, like a science fiction superhero. Could you tell me more about it?
I think as a young child reading comics and science fiction, he developed 3 missions that motivated him in life. The first, which came from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and other such science fiction books, is that we really should be a spacefaring species. In other words, humans should go to space. They should get to Mars. They should go to different planets. Why? Because human consciousness is pretty fragile. If we're going to make it safe in future centuries, it'd be nice to be on other planets. But also, it's the ultimate adventure. As I said, sometimes we're not adventuresome as we used to be. Going to space is the great adventure. Number 2 in his missions was we have to have sustainable energy. And this helped drive him to get us into the era of electric vehicles connected to solar roofs and battery packs. The batteries, a lot of the batteries, of course, made in Japan. This advance of battery technology, which he does with Panasonic and he does with some of his own companies. This is important to his mission, that we transition to a world of electric vehicles and the storage of electricity. And then third mission, from reading Isaac Asimov and his robot science fiction, is to make sure that artificial intelligence is safe, that our robots don't turn on us, that they don't leave us behind, and that AI helps rather than hurts humanity.
Okay, let's focus on the importance of taking risks. And I was, in your book, I was overwhelmed that Musk never fears taking risks. So there is an important lesson for the society, too much entrenched and too much organized. What is your opinion about it?
Well, I think it's important that he's a risk taker. And as you say, he's not only willing to take risks, he loves taking risks.
Loves.
Peter Thiel, one of the people who founded PayPal with him, or the companies that became PayPal, says, most entrepreneurs understand how to calculate risk. Yeah. Musk doesn't just calculate it, he embraces it. He wants it. And so I think that's one of the things that's made him successful. But also, let me point out, it means that the first 3 rockets he launched in the early 2000s blew up. The last time he launched a big rocket, Starship, it went up. It got to space for 3 minutes, but then it blew up. So if you're a risk taker, you're going to leave some debris in the wake. You're going to have some rubble. You're going to cause some things to break. And he's more willing to shoot things up, to explode things, maybe to let things break, because then he learns how to do it. And I think, my opinion, is it's good to have people like him nudging us a little bit more in the direction of taking risks.
Okay. On diversity, I hear you grew up in New Orleans, and you say that diversity has helped you develop your talents. And could you tell more about the importance of diversity?
Yes. I mean, I think it's really important to have different types of minds, different types of people mingling together. The earliest person I wrote about in history is Leonardo da Vinci. He comes from a very small village, and he's a misfit. He's illegitimate. His father won't legitimate him. He's gay. He's left-handed. He's distracted. But then he goes from the village of Vinci to the city of Florence, and it's a very diverse place. There are people coming in from the fall of Constantinople and the Arab world. It's a trading center. It's people like him and Michelangelo and others who are diverse personalities, and that makes it the cauldron or the cradle for the Renaissance. Well, you see that happening 200 years later. 200 years later in Philadelphia, in the United States, where you have Anglicans and Presbyterians and slaves and freed slaves and Moravians and Jews all coming together in Philadelphia, city of brotherly love. That's what it means. And that diversity helps create a new type of nation, the United States, in which everybody tries to become a part, no matter what their background is. And then you have the diversity that comes in New Orleans, where I grew up, in which all sorts of mix of people, black and white and Creole and Vietnamese and Jews and Moravians and, Germans and Italians. And it helps create jazz music. It helps create a great food. It helps do a creative culture. So I'm always been a fan of diverse places that become cradles of creativity.
Do you mean diversity is closely connected to the creativity? You mean
Yeah,
that?
the friction that comes from bouncing ideas from people very different from you helps you be creative. And by the way, it can sometimes make it difficult. There's a lot of sparks, good and bad sparks, that come when people who are very different have to all live together.
Do you think the prosperity of Silicon Valley also result of the foundation of diversity?
Yes, to some extent. I write about that in the Steve Jobs book and in the Innovators book, which is that in the 1970s in Silicon Valley, you had a whole mix of people, from rocket engineers and technologists to free speech movement types, to hippies, to people experimenting with LSD and acid, to the anti-war protesters. And they're all come together in this mix that helps create Silicon Valley. But I don't think Silicon Valley is diverse enough to contain all the creativity that we need. And the good thing that's happening in the United States is what Steve Case calls the rise of the rest, meaning cities and towns across America where they're creative people are now developing startup and entrepreneurial cultures, whether it's Austin, Texas, where I spend a lot of time with Elon Musk, or New Orleans, or Columbus, Ohio, or Chattanooga, or Nashville. You find places where there's creative music, creative food, creative people, but also creative technology. And I think it's good that a lot of the venture capital is now moving away from Silicon Valley to some of these other places around the country where you see pockets of creativity.
It's been a long time Japan became a backward country in the creative field. And in your opinion, what is lacking in today's Japan?
Well, first of all, I love today's Japan. I just came back from Kyoto, which may be one of my favorite spots on earth. And there, as you see in Kyoto, but also in Tokyo, a mix of deep tradition and then innovative culture. I think that you see great innovations with companies in Japan right now, whether it's on microchips or battery cells. I do think that maybe, and that's not up to me to tell, my friends in Japan exactly how to do things, but maybe a little bit more risk-taking, a little bit more challenging the rules and regulations. That's not just true about Japan. It's true about Europe. It's true about a lot of the United States, that sometimes questioning authority, thinking out of the box, thinking in an innovative way requires taking some risks and being a little bit less bureaucratic. Now, I don't know if that's really still the case in Japan, because when I go to Japan, I see a lot of exciting entrepreneurs. But I do think whether it's Japan or New Orleans or Paris it would help for people to sometimes question some of the established rules and regulations and maybe break a few things by taking risks.
You sometimes say that people who can believe that he can change the world can really change the world. Could you tell your belief more about, could you tell me about your belief?
Well, that was a wonderful Steve Jobs line in one of the commercials that he helped write in the late 1990s. And I think this is a great way to sort of sum it all up of this great conversation, which is Steve Jobs said in this ad, here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the round pegs in the square hole. And I'll stop right there and say, who does that describe? Well, it describes a young gay Leonardo coming out of Vinci. It describes Einstein being Jewish and growing up in Germany. It describes Steve Jobs being adopted and feeling out of place growing up. And it describes Elon Musk with his traumatic childhood in South Africa. And Jobs goes on to say, here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the round pegs in the square hole. The ones who think different. And then he says, because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. Now, that's the lesson of Steve Jobs. That's the lesson of Elon Musk. When you ask me about Japan, or for that matter, Paris and New Orleans or any other place, it's a lesson that sometimes we have to be willing to be crazy enough to think we can change the world and maybe not be as reckless as Elon Musk, but at least try to understand the good drives that have made Musk and Jobs and so many other people successful. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We still have 5 minutes, but I think it's okay. Okay, thank you very much for accepting our offer.
That was a wonderful interview. You had really good questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Great. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.